Welcome back to My Favorite Failure. Today I'm with Michel. Greg, thank you for being with me.
Travis, thank you for having me.
So I thought you retired.
Yeah, I've had that a lot. A lot of people have said, hey, I thought you were retired. I think I've done this twice now. It's just not in me to retire yet.
Yeah. So right now you left, you retired from MEMA, and then now you're with S1E3 Supply?
Correct. Yep, in Roseland, Louisiana.
So I looked them up after we talked a couple of weeks ago, and that's a pretty impressive company.
They are, yeah, and they've got a very humble beginning, and I've known the folks there for about 8, going on 10 years now, and we've been talking about working together for a long time. So when I left MEMA, I did in fact intend to take a break, but it was a very short break, and reconnected with Chad Tate, the president there, and decided we were going to work together. So I've been there since July this past last year.
And you're the COO?
Correct, yes.
What drew you to that position?
The challenge. I'm been driven by challenge, and a lot of folks, seems like I've always gotten into jobs where the challenges were certainly there, and the position here with S1E3 is no exception to that. But that was the main reason was the challenge.
So what are some of the challenges that you face on a daily basis?
Well, I think some of the bigger challenges that we face there at S1E3 are not too much unlike what other folks are facing with the labor market, and there are a number of reasons for that. But we're the largest independent petroleum distributor manufacturer in the United States, and we do business in 90 countries worldwide, all over the United States. So the demand for our product, is high, and we're very much a people-driven industry. So with our production lines, so the instability of the labor force, it probably creates the biggest challenge there.
So you seem to find yourself or put yourself in positions of great stress and what's the word I'm looking for?
Almost sounds like I'm a little crazy.
Almost. So what I want to do is kind of touch base on your milestones, your career milestones. What led you from, the start to becoming director at MEMA? Yeah.
Well, I go back to the military because, and I will say that, having a career in the military was never anything that I sought to do when I was in high school. It was something that, and I'm much a great believer in that, God, if we allow, God takes us in pathways sometimes that we don't think is the right way to go.
Right.
But I joined the National Guard when I got out of high school, just to try to be real quick, primarily to have money to go to college. And I did do that, and it did allow me to be able to go to college and help me with GI Bill and other benefits that we had. Spent 10 years as a traditional soldier and had intended to get out. Was going to get out of the military after I did my initial enlistment, and door opened up that I had not expected, and ended up going active duty with the National Guard. So that just opened a whole new world that I had not anticipated to be in my life. So, my successes and how I developed as a leader can all go back to, biggest with opportunities and positions that I held there in the military. And one of a couple of them that really stand out in the military, when we talk about taking on challenges, when I would say 3/4 through my career, I went to deployed with Iraq with the Infantry Battalion, which is who I spent the majority of my career with, about 20 years as a combat armed soldier, and really, that was critical to how it shaped me. And deploying with those men and those women, and what we experienced together was it just really it changed me in a lot of good ways. So when I came out of that, was asked to go into recruiting, which is a complete 180 from what I had done in the Infantry Battalion, and got into recruiting and again took on some challenges and found some areas that I had some successes with. But long story short, years later, I was asked to come to Washington, D.C., and when you talk about being taken out of your comfort zone, had not done a whole lot as far as that level of management. and was asked to go to Washington, D.C. and be the chief strength manager for the National Guard's recruiting program nationwide. Mm-hmm. So now I've gone from managing recruiting for the state of Mississippi to now managing the recruiting program for all of the United States. So it was thrown into a situation, a lot of challenges, and that really caused me to develop myself. So that was one of probably the bigger milestones in my career. And then from there, when I came back to Mississippi and held some positions, and ultimately led me to my final position that I had in the military, which was being the installation commander at Camp Shelby. So it just seemed like that every position was developing me for the next position that came along.
What I thought about this over the past couple of weeks, from recruiting for the military to being in a position with MEMA and other companies where you're actually looking to hire talent and employees. What's the difference in what you're looking for from a military standpoint out of somebody? What are the traits that you look for in somebody for the military compared to somebody you're looking for to run a big business?
That's a good question. And I would say, in all honesty, with the challenges that I'm facing right now with Smitty's, I would say probably there are less differences there than you might think right there on the surface. But one of the big ones that stands out to me with what you're looking for in the military, you're talking about, especially when you're recruiting for the National Guard or the Reserves as opposed to active duty. The challenges that we faced there was, we're recruiting young men and women to come into the military that are coming in maybe for the same reasons that I was, looking for educational benefits. The thought of going to war and deploying and potentially losing your life is not really something at the top of their mind. That, generally speaking, would be in the list of things if you were going active duty. And I still run into people today that don't know that. So I would say that the biggest challenge in recruiting talent that I was faced with was finding those individuals that were really truly willing to go all in and give of their lives if needed to be. Because at the time when I was in recruiting, we were approaching the height of the war on terrorism, 9/11, war in Afghanistan, war in Iraq, and of course, we met and exceeded recruiting goals. So there's a lot of patriotism at that particular time. But that's the difference. And you're talking about recruiting talent now that I'm looking for, and I am heavily involved in recruiting talent and working with our human resources director there in finding the right people. It is bringing people in that are willing to not only come and earn a paycheck, but they need to be committed to the goal of the company, and meeting the demands of our customers worldwide. And that's something that we really try to. It's important for everyone, I think, that's working, whether they're working behind a rifle in combat or if they're on a production line. They need to know, why are they there? Why am I here? What am I doing? What is the purpose of what I am doing right now? So I think that's a common thread, but also the difference is what is the level of sacrifice.
Yeah. So I don't know if you remember, but the first time we met, I was doing some video work, shooting a video for Crisis Track at MEMA.
Absolutely.
And you were the last interview that I had to do. And that week that I was there was the week before all the COVID measures and the lockdowns hit and everything. I noticed a buzz around MEMA. Knew this was about to be serious. Didn't know how serious it was about to get, but can you kind of run me through? You went from managing some of the worst storms Mississippi's ever seen to jumping right into COVID.
Yeah.
Walk me through the initial first few days, first few weeks of that.
Well, managing storms, tornadoes, hurricanes, as devastating as they are and as impactful as they are, they're unfortunately or fortunately, however you want to look at that, we've gotten pretty much into a battle rhythm on how we deal with that, both at the state level and the county level. But man, this COVID outbreak was something that was new. I mean, this was a new challenge, and this was not something that was affecting one state or even a region of the state. This affected the United States. So when you're talking about something of that magnitude, I go back to and I try to compare it to Hurricane Katrina. Hurricane Katrina was devastating, many lives lost, and you ask yourself, how do you prepare for something like that? And and you take COVID and you add the multipliers for the effects and devastation there. So to answer your question, there was a lot of anxiety, as you mentioned, anxiety level, and most of that was driven around the ability to get just the basic personal protection equipment that we know we needed to field, trying to get ahead of this to prevent the spread. Because that's really what it was about, was we knew that it was coming. We'd been seeing what had been happening in other parts of the world, and when it started hitting, it was almost like looking when you're on TV and watching the news. It was almost like watching one of the old sci-fi movies, or about the virus hitting and states starting to change color because the virus had now affected those states, and you saw it coming. Mm-hmm. It's almost like being on a battlefield. You're seeing the enemy coming, and it's right at your back door. And man, we got lives are at stake here. Mm-hmm. So it was serious. I mean, it was really serious. So you talk about a high level of anxiety, and you take it on personally when numbers start being counted about people dying. And it becomes emotional. So with everyone. But it was different. We had to, there were a lot of things that we had to react to. But I will tell you, at the end of the day, I could not have worked with a finer group of folks in all of the state agencies, not only MEMA, but with Mississippi Department of Health and the staff in the governor's office and all the other state agencies that jumped in on that. Man, it was an absolute team effort to do it. But the challenge on the front end was, man, it was the logistics and getting stuff in to just equip everyone with what they needed.
Yeah. So I go from having met you for the first time there a couple weeks before COVID started to seeing you every day on TV. Tell me about that, being there with Governor Reeves and addressing the state. It was daily for a few months, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
So tell me about the preparation for that and, the trust that the public, puts into you and that feeling and how you, went about addressing the state on these, serious topics.
Yeah. Well, initially, like as with anything, I mean, the governor, what he wanted to do is he wanted to make sure that he was talking to the citizens of Mississippi. I think early on, what we said was not as nearly important as it was to just say, to speak, to talk to the citizens of Mississippi and let them know that we were engaged in this event and we were doing everything we needed to do. As those press conferences, developed, the talking points, began to shape, and the material that we were providing, the statistics that we were giving, and the governor was very adamant that we be transparent, and
well, that was one thing I noticed is nobody's really ever had to do those daily briefings before, and the transparency was evident.
Yeah.
And it was just crazy to see how much information y'all were having to gather to then give to us.
Yeah.
How did y'all go about, forming not necessarily bullet points, but, the information that you were giving us? Where did that come from?
Yeah. Well, it was coming from a number of different sources. I mean, we were getting data from not only from within our state agencies, but we were getting data, from the federal. One of the unique things that I had never been involved in before, even when I worked in D.C., was the number of calls that we had with the White House. I mean, with the president and their staff, and I mean, when I say with the president, I'm talking about with the president and his cabinet. And I was fortunate to sit in on a number of those meetings, and there was a lot of tight knit communication, not only with the White House but with other governors. And so we were sharing information, and that information then we were getting and resharing that information with the citizens of Mississippi to try to keep them informed. The health data, and the as far as the infections data that we were getting were coming, of course, from the Mississippi Department of Health and with operations officers within the Mississippi Emergency Management Agency and other agencies that were providing data. I mean, you talk about the prison systems, Mississippi Department of Corrections providing data on infection with with the prison population, which was a big topic there at one point, and the outbreaks there. The hospitals were all reporting through their respective associations. So there was a lot of data that was coming in and having to do that and update it. So the accuracy of the data got better as we went.
So you wound up with COVID.
It did.
Bad.
Yeah, and that was terribly unexpected because I had a tendency to think that I'm, 10 feet tall and bulletproof, at times. Not that I'm hard-headed at all, but, I'd gotten through that. And, I mean, I was in good shape. I always tried to take care of myself. And I saw, who was being affected by COVID. I mean, I was seeing it every day and seeing who was being affected, who was the most at risk. And I was probably in that bottom category of being affected. So my risk level should have been, at least in my mind, very low. It's not at all how it happened, and that all changed. Christmas of, when Christmas hit, that year that I got it, spent a week in the hospital. It was serious. It got my attention.
So one thing that I want to ask you is I want to talk about your daily routine. For me, working for myself, I basically am my own motivator. And my daily task is to figure out how I can get the most out of myself. Yeah. So I'm always interested, when talking with successful people, what's your daily routine like? How do you get the most out of yourself each day? And I'm sure that's changed some since military versus what you're doing now. But, what are some of the main things you try to get done during the day as far as routine goes? Yeah.
Well, you're absolutely correct. I mean, my daily routine it's been very all over the place, since I've started working with Smitty's. But generally speaking, I mean, it's really important. I try to focus on, I always say this, you got to start the day. You've got to do things to prepare yourself mentally, spiritually, and physically every day. If you don't do that, life is going to get you. Mm-hmm. And, when young people, asking me, how do I do this or how do I do that? And let me just say, I do not have the golden ticket answer to and I've certainly made my own mistakes in life. Trust me, that list is long. But what I do to manage myself with the stresses that I deal with on a daily basis, and it seems like all the jobs, and you've said this on the front end, were very stressful. So we start out with, we use a spiritual thing, and this is something that I've not always done a good job. But if I don't take the time, I can tell you the difference between the days that I stop and I spend a little personal time, and for me, that's time I spend with a little devotion. If it's 3 minutes, it makes all the difference in the world to try to get my spiritual mind right. And again, learn some tough lessons by trying to do it without that. The next thing is, you got to take time for the physical nurturing. So I try to take time, whether it's in the mornings or in the evenings, and that's moved around, to just take a little bit of physical time to manage, not only for my health but for my mind as well. And then whether that's working out, running, doing some weights, push-ups, whatever the case may be, 20 minutes is what I try to do with that every day. I say every day, 3 to 5 times a day is what I strive to do. And then the rest of my time during the day, and I'm working, pretty long hours right now, trying to help and get teams established there, is managing and spending time with subordinate leadership. And what I'm struggling with right now is developing subordinate leaders, which is extremely important in any organization you are, is to develop subordinate leaders and empower them. So you've got to devote a certain amount of time during the day to develop them, because if you're not working to train your replacement, if you're not doing that every day to try to train somebody to replace you, then you're doing the organization an injustice, in my opinion. Because the better you do that, I think the better your job is. So I focus, when I am looking and building a team, I am looking to surround myself with people that are better than I am. Because I have strengths, but I also have weaknesses. And, it may be my weaknesses may outbalance my strengths at times. So I try to find people in the team, as far as in the business aspect of my life, is to put people around me that offset my weaknesses and find that person that's going to replace me one day.
That would be the ultimate team.
Absolutely.
So now, I want to get into the meat of the show, which is my favorite failure. So what's your favorite failure?
Yeah. So, when you first asked me that question, I'm thinking, because I could list a number of so many failures in my life and reflect on those. But one of the ones that stands out the most to me, that I think has probably affected me in many ways, and it changed the way that I looked at my careers and taking on positions, would have been back probably about 10 years into my service in the military. Around probably 1996. I was a young captain, and I had my battalion commander at the time it was one Sunday at the end of a training period, and he said he'd asked me to come to the battalion headquarters, and I did. And he sat me down in his office, and he said, "Greg," he goes, "I want you to take Bravo Company. We've got a commander that's going out." And for the listeners that don't know, what a line company is, I mean, that's ultimate achievement, because that's to be a commander of a line company was a big deal. For me though, I was struggling because I was looking to get out. As I'd said earlier in the cast, I was looking to get out of the military. I just kind of gotten burnt out. I'd just gotten married, and I had a career and was trying to spend a lot of time away from home. I just didn't know if really that was something that I wanted to take on at this point in my career. So I told my battalion commander, I said, "Sir," I said, I thank you. I'd like to think about it if I can, and I'll let you know back. So long story short, I did, and got back with him the next morning, and he said, "Well, Greg," he goes, "I appreciate it," because I've given that position to another captain. And he said, and Greg, he goes,
So you told him you were going to take it?
Yeah, I'd called him. I'd come back. I had decided I was going to take the job, and but he'd already given it to someone else. And man, it really hit me. And ended up going to a really good friend of mine, and he took the position. And he's a 3-star general today. But what I learned from that is, and we had conversations about it later. He said, "Greg," he goes, one thing you need to know, that whether you think that you have the abilities to do a job or not, if someone comes to you and offers you a position, then they've already done the assessment for you, and they think that you have the qualities to take on that job.
Right.
And man, it hit me like a ton of bricks, because when I say I regretted taking a position, I mean, I ended up getting another command later and ended up staying in the military. Clearly I did for 30 years. So everything worked out just fine, but it shaped me. And what that taught me, and I use this today, even with people, again, when they're asking me, what do I need to do? And I've even gone and offered people positions in jobs, and I just don't think I can do it. And I've tried to use that example. And some folks it resonates with, some folks it doesn't. But for me, it changed my life. So from that point forward, if someone came to me, whether it was military, even after that, I mean, and the job in Washington, D.C., perfect example. I had no idea what I was taking on. I had never worked at that level before. Going in and working and having meetings at the Pentagon and dealing with the folks that I actually dealt with, it was overwhelming, but I did do it.
What were the meetings at the Pentagon like?
I mean, I had meetings with Secretary of the Army. I had meetings with high-level officials on the President's cabinet. I mean, just meetings with people that I never in a million years, much less think I'd be in a meeting eating in the cafeteria at the Pentagon, much less going into a secure area and having a secure brief at these big mahogany conference table. You know what I'm saying?
That's the picture I have in my head.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what it's like. These huge conference tables and in meetings with people, and you're sitting there going, man, who am I to be here doing this right now? And then the job with MEMA, the same thing. To work and work in a position like that, that's humbling.
Yeah.
It's humbling, and I don't, if I had not had those experiences before, and I've had times before, and I'd be with the governor, whether it be Governor Bryant when I came in, or Governor Reeves, and be in a meeting with them, or be riding with them somewhere, and I'm going like, who am I to be doing this? I never took that for granted, but man, the opportunities that I've had by following that guidance that Lieutenant Colonel Scott Woods gave me in 96, it never left me, and it changed me forever. So that failure to take on that job, I consider to be my greatest failure, because it shaped me, it changed me.
It made you more assertive.
It made me more assertive, and every position I took, it shaped me more. I think it certainly gave me more skill sets. It shaped my experiences, and life experiences are really about what really truly shapes you as a person, as a leader. It changed me, changed the whole way I looked at things.
Well, I guess the ultimate goal is when you mess up, learn something from it.
Yeah.
Which is the whole purpose of what I'm doing here. The next topic I want to discuss, as far as your favorite failure goes, and I think I've been hoping that somebody would open up about this, but managing marriage, divorce, career. Yeah,
so I thought a lot about this too, and how I would say this, and and it not be received by listeners in a certain way. But I will tell you that when I talked about mistakes, I've made plenty, and many of those I'm not proud of. When I was a child, growing up as a young boy, very low self-esteem, was overweight. I didn't play sports in high school, so I didn't have that, that athletic, all those things that build young men and build them, build self-confidence and doing those things. And I didn't have that, and I didn't have that at all until I joined the military. And even it was much later, even probably after my deployment to Iraq, where it really got my attention and shaped me as a man, a man. So I found out that I found out one of my strengths was that I could solve problems, and I could take things that were broken and fix them.
And that was the first bit of confidence you really had, from the things you missed out on as a kid, or that you weren't physically gifted enough to have experience. Yeah,
because in the military I became very athletic. I did very well on my PT tests, and I found that I was good at it, and I would always do really well on that, and built with that. So the military, I adapted very well with that. I saw things that I was doing well, and it made me a lot more confident, especially as I went on took on these other positions.
I bet that's the same for a lot of men and women that join the military that might not have been as confident. It kind of forces you to be because of the weight that you take on with that job.
Yeah, it affects everyone differently. It affects someone, come in and they do it. Yeah, it was good. Get out from the initial enlistment. But I've served with a lot of great men and women that are just absolutely wonderful soldiers. And I'm not saying that the military is only subject to this, but that's where I spent the majority of my time. But a lot of type A aggressives that I've served with in the military had similar experiences. But yes, I have had a broken marriage, and one of the biggest reasons for that is that the same principles that I used in my work, in that committing myself to the challenges and being successful in my work. If I was truthful to myself, I did not use those same. I didn't use that same approach in my marriage, and I'm not proud of that at all. So when I shaped and found out that I was good at that, and I went all in with that, there were things that I neglected in my personal life, and I'm not proud of that at all. And I was in some leadership training this past weekend with Smitty's, and one of the things that I wrote down, and I had the notes from the meeting, and over on the right I did personal reflections for Greg Michel, and I was writing down on there, and in one of the bullets I wrote, you must balance your work and personal life or risk losing what is truly dear to you. And I've done that, and I've lost what is dear to me, and it was a terrible lesson, and to make it even worse, when I was at MEMA dealing with the COVID outbreak, and even dealing with the COVID, I was also dealing with that transition period in my life with that, and it was
wow.
It was not easy. And I look back on that, and I'm going, man, I don't even. You look back on it now, and I'm looking at it from this side, looking back, and going, my gosh, that was ugly. That was ugly. Only by the grace of God am I here right now, in being able to, to talk about it. And look, I've not done the things that I needed to do in many aspects of my life. But I am an example that God's grace is never ending.
Amen.
And I'm here, and one thing that I do have going for me, I'm a fighter. And I've learned to survive, and my prayer is that that God will save me from myself.
Yeah.
But I consider myself to be a better person having come from all that. But I guess the biggest thing that I can tell listeners about those that are looking to do well in their professional career, you got to balance that. You've got to balance that, and you've got to every day. You have to do a self-perspective. You've got to do an inventory on yourself. You got to look in the mirror, and you've got to know who you are. You got to truly know who you are, and you've got to identify what are your weaknesses. What are my weaknesses? What are my strengths? and do those weaknesses, any of those weaknesses tied to areas that you can stumble and fall in your personal life, in your marriage, and you got, when you identify them, you got to highlight them in bold yellow, bold print, underline it 3 times with 4 exclamation points, and you got to put it out there. You got to know it, you got to recognize it, and you got to put things in place to make sure that those things do not trip you up. And so those are things that you learn. So if you want to talk about another greatest failure, I would use the term greatest very loosely in this one, but that's certainly a failure in my life that I'm trying to grow from, and be stronger and be better.
Well, I'm proud of you for making it through it.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you for your service.
My pleasure.
For our country. That truly is a calling, and I'm in debt to you, and I appreciate you putting your life on the line, not just in the military, but at MEMA. And everything that you've done. Second of all, thank you for opening up today. That was powerful stuff, and I'm honored to have had you on.
Well, I appreciate that. It's very humbling, and I'm just one of many that have served that way, and I'm honored to have been able to have done it, to have served my community, my state, my nation, and in any way that I can. And I'm just glad I had the opportunity to do it.
Well, we're very grateful, Greg. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Travis. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Yes, sir.